Thank you so much for stopping by. In case this is your first time, a very warm welcome to you. My name is Miriam. I'm a Kenyan journalist, and in my journalism career, I focus on the current affairs across the continent of Africa. And while just looking at the issues across the continent of Africa, one of the key things that I get to the conversations that I indulge in a lot are issues to do with the African Union. And in having these conversations, what has emerged are questions pertaining the independence of African Union and questions on whose interest that does African Union truly represent? Does it fully capture the aspirations of the people of this continent? Does it represent us in ways that we would wish for it to represent us, especially in the international politics and the international system? And the answers to these questions usually are no, that African Union has fallen short and does not fully represent the interest of the people of Africa. And so you wonder why. Well, these questions are founded and quite legitimate, and these are questions that we should truly interact with and see what is going on with African Union, and why does African Union not fully represent this continent as the majority of the people of this continent feel, and why is that the case? But before I perhaps give my opinion on why I think this is what the reason could be, there was a recent meeting. There was a recent summit on a new global finance impact summit that happened in France, that was hosted by France's President Emmanuel Macron, and a few African leaders attended this summit and had a chance to give their opinions on whatever is happening. And one of them was of course Kenya's President William Ruto, who had very strong sentiments on how the imbalance, especially when it comes to these international financial institutions, how we are given the same loans, African countries, Western countries, and other countries, but you find that the global south, or countries that are perceived to have high risks, we pay more, and yet we are the ones who are not all the way there in terms of financial muscle, and the other countries who are developed, their interest rates are a bit far less compared to countries, say, from Africa. So this is an issue that he raised, and this is something that has been happening, and these are some of the inequalities that do exist in some of these international institutions. And so, among other issues that the Kenyan president raised, but President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa also underpinned very important points as far as the mistreatment of Africa. And I think he reiterated that Africa should be treated as equal and the importance of that, and also saying that Africa is not on a begging mission. So before I even, perhaps speak much about this, let's just hear just a bit of what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say during this summit.
It will help us not to participate as unequal cousins in these institutions. It will help us to participate fully, and so that we don't have a sense that we are beggars, that we are being dealt with out of generosity. I think it's important in the new era that the world is in now that there should be a good measure of equality among sovereign nations. So we were not on a begging mission, even as we are in great need as a continent and all that. That should go to demonstrate that Africa should never be seen as a continent that needs generosity. We want to be treated as equals. Even in the multilateral institutions, we want to be treated as equals. And if our equity is at a low ebb, there must be ways in which that can be addressed.
While I do agree with President Cyril Ramaphosa that Africa is not on a begging mission, and what we're looking for is not what we're getting from the Western powers, But we have to understand, of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa is speaking from a backdrop. Remember the recent trip he made to Ukraine and also to Russia? He was accompanied by a few other heads of state from the continent, and others who were not able to go did send some representatives. And they wanted their voices to be heard and perhaps try to broker peace in this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
You know, recently, 7 African countries decided to go and put a call for peace to Ukraine and to Russia. And we raised a number of issues. Zambia was represented, Comoros was represented, Republic of Congo was represented, Senegal was represented, Uganda, as well as South Africa. So we were all represented, and Egypt as well.
And of course, that was not taken very seriously, especially by Western countries. Nobody cared. They were not given the respect that they deserved as heads of state. I was listening to some commentary on France 24, the leading French television station. And the commentators that were present on that show, on that day, during this trip, these African leaders made, were saying, this is something that nobody is taking very seriously, and the African leaders were looking like a joke.
The critics have been unsparing, and the critics mainly, obviously, Ukraine, but also in the U.S., Europe, members of NATO. What have they been saying? The criticism ranges from this is a laughingstock mediation mission, mediation in quotes, to they have absolutely no leverage compared to the real global powers such as China, which could have some bearing on this conflict if it really had the will or the political will, to they are not neutral.
And so President Cyril Ramaphosa is saying Africa is not on a begging mission. Now, here's the deal. For Africa to be respected, for Africa to be treated as an equal in the international system, then one, Africa has to start taking herself seriously. And by this I mean, and I'll go to where I started from when I started this conversation, the issue to do with African Union, this very important institution that should represent the aspirations and should be working on the agenda of this continent and represent us, especially when it comes to the international politics or international system or whatever it is that is going out there and what is happening in the continent. We have seen African Union not being able to do that. And the reason why African Union cannot fully represent our interest as a continent is because we don't fund this institution. We cannot just be entitled to respect. First of all, President Cyril Ramaphosa, the African National Congress, that is the ANC, the party, the leading party in South Africa, had a convention, a delegates convention or something just a couple of months ago. South Africa could not afford to fund that. A Russian oligarch funded that. And when you know the relationship between a Russian oligarch and the Russian presidency, you know, if you understand these things, then you know when an oligarch, especially in a country like South Africa, does something, then obviously the assumption is they're doing it on behalf of the Russian government. So the ANC could not fund this convention. The Russian oligarch, funded their convention. There are certain institutions in a country that we should not be allowing any kind of external interference, any kind of external funding. And that should include our electoral processes. I was shocked to learn during Kenya's last election, there was, that time there was a back and forth between the government that was in power, President Uhuru Kenyatta's government, and the IEBC at that time. And the government had put measures in place and that any kind of funding that was coming to the Electoral Commission of Kenya had to go through the government. Okay, the government had to be made aware. Apparently, anybody, any institution, any individual, any country can fund the Electoral Commission of Kenya without the government's direct approval. What kind of a country runs their affairs like that? And that is true to many other countries across Africa. something like an electoral process, that is something that should be out of bounds from any external institution, from any external country, from any kind of external funding. I know elections is a very expensive affair, but the minute you allow these outsiders to come in and fund, you are essentially allowing them to have a voice in your electoral process. So you can't have them funding you, and then now you are having problems when they're giving out their opinions or when they're demanding for certain things, because they don't just give you these monies because they're feeling very philanthropic. They give these monies and these fundings, especially in certain processes in these countries, because of the interest that they know these institutions or these countries hold for them, that at the end of the day will serve their foreign policy. That is how that goes. That is the bottom line. So, but I digress. I will not get into it. And so we're here calling for Africa to be treated as equal. We're here calling for African Union to be independent. Do you know? I was just reading a report in 2021. 75% of funding or the monies that African Union need for its day-to-day running and everything else that it does came from European Union and other individual countries and other outsiders. 75% of funding of African Union. And I was just going through a report. Let me go through it quickly. I think it was published today, the 2nd of July. Just part of it, you can go to the African Union's website, you'll see that. And so this is just partly what it says. Peace support operations will be funded by member states and international partners. Of the total budget, 38% is to be assessed on member states, while 61% will be from partners. So even in this new budgeting that African Union is making, today is the 2nd of July 2023. This article was posted today, okay? And still in their budgeting, they're giving African member states just the smaller part for them to fund the activities of the African Union. 38% is to be assessed on member states, while 61% will be from partners. Okay, that is the European Union, US and other members, Japan, wherever, China, mention them. The operating budget will be fully funded by member states, while the program budget will be funded 41% by member states and 59% solicited from international partners. The program budget will support the consolidation of the implementation of key Agenda 2063 flagship projects, including infrastructure development, driving the regional integration agenda, peace and security, education and skills development, energy, health, as well as promoting gender equality. So this is what the African Union is hoping will happen, that member states, they'll be given the lower percentage to fund, which I can guarantee you the member states will not be able to submit these monies, okay? So it will end up that EU and other foreign funders or foreign partners, as the AU is putting it, will be the funders of this. So as long as the EU, as long as these countries from outside Africa and these institutions and these individuals continue funding the affairs of African Union, then we will continue being treated the way we are being treated in the international system. We can't have our cake and eat it. We can't have them fund us and still claim sovereignty and still claim we need to be respected. We cannot feel that entitled, okay? You're not entitled to respect. You earn it. So President Cyril Ramaphosa, as much as I do agree with you that Africa and her people should be treated as equal, and we're not on a begging spree. Come on, you can't even fund, your activities, your party activities, your electoral process. You can't fund that, and you're saying Africa is not on a begging spree. Of course you are. All of you are. And until our leadership gets a bit of shame and a bit of dignity and treat themselves and represent us in that manner, then we will continue being treated like that. We will continue having these international institutions having different rules for the Western world and for Africa, like we've seen that play out in the financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on and so forth. And so I think time for Africa to lament is over, and for Africa to truly stand in its feet and to bring meaningful contribution to the international system, and for it to gain this respect that it is demanding, then Africa must start funding the African Union. Let's start with that. Let's start with that. And then we see if that will make a difference moving forward. But for us to go out there, complain, demand to be respected, demand to be treated as equal, while we cannot even fund African Union, that is a joke. And we will continue to be treated as a joke. So President Cyril Ramaphosa, President William Ruto, President Paul Kagame, and these other few presidents who have been advancing this rhetoric of Pan-Africanism and the importance of Africa to be respected and all these things, that will only be a rhetoric, and it will remain a rhetoric. Saying it, I so excited a lot of people from this continent, but the reality is, are they willing to follow through? Are they willing to take the risks? Because we've seen countries and leaders who have dared, question and take stance that goes against the status quo and this set of rules and imbalances that have been set by the global north. And we've seen how some of these leaders have ended. Are they ready to take that risk? And this is where a call for unity in this continent, I think this is where a united Africa can really come in and do the job and benefit us. But unfortunately, we have been disunited from all fronts. The Francophones, the Anglophones, the whatnot, the northern part of Africa, the southern sub-Saharan Africa, and all these divisions that we have. So it's very difficult to just bring us together and have us talk in a united voice. And I think once we are able to realize that our power is in our unity, all these wonderful things our leaders are saying will just remain that. They'll just remain rhetorics unless they're willing to follow up with action, tangible action, actionable steps. Then we still have a long way to go, and we will continue having them complain. President Ruto will complain, will make these stands. He will leave, another Kenyan president will come, will do the same in other African countries, and nothing will change, okay? But we must change, and the first step towards African changing is taking back African Union. And we can only take back African Union, have it run our agenda by funding it. Until and when we are able to do that, then we still have a long way to go. And in the meantime, the disrespect will continue, the double standard will continue, the different sets of rules will continue, and that's all. There's nothing we can do about it.